Liquid glass is a significant new step and evolution of the look and feel of Apple software. It introduces a flexible, dynamic layer to apps and system experiences across Apple's ecosystem of products. It builds on learnings from all the way from the Aqua user interface of macOS 10 through to the real-time blurs of iOS 7, to the fluidity of iPhone 10, the flexibility of the dynamic island, and the immersive interface of Vision OS. Building off these learnings, rather than trying to simply recreate a material from the physical world, liquid glass is a new digital metamaterial that dynamically bends and shapes light. And simultaneously, it behaves and moves organically in a manner that feels more like a lightweight liquid, responding to both the fluidity of touch and the dynamism of modern apps. I'm Chan, and I'm a designer on Apple's Human Interface design team. In this session, we'll go over some of the core dynamic properties of liquid glass. Then, my colleague Shaban will discuss how liquid glass automatically adapts to different contexts and environments. Lastly, Bruno will take us through some key principles on how to work with liquid glass. Let's dive in. Liquid glass complements the evolution of Apple product design as screens have gotten more rounded and more immersive. It's represented in the UI in rounded, floating forms that nest neatly in the rounded curves of modern devices. These clearly defined shapes feel easy to tap and are designed to relate to the natural geometry of our fingers, so they feel friendly to touch interaction. The primary way liquid glass visually defines itself is through something called lensing. Lensing occurs all around us in our experience of the natural world. Through this experience, we've all gained an intuitive understanding of how the warping and bending of light of a transparent object communicates to us its presence, its motion, and form. Liquid glass uses these instinctive visual cues to provide separation and communicate layering in a new way while letting content shine through underneath it. Whereas previous materials scattered light, this new set of materials dynamically bends, shapes, and concentrates light in real time. This provides definition against the background content while still feeling visually grounded in our experience of the natural world. By sculpting light like this, controls can feel ultra lightweight and transparent while still being visually distinguishable. Instead of fading, liquid glass objects materialize in and out by gradually modulating light bending and lensing, ensuring a graceful transition that preserves the optical integrity of the material. How the material feels and behaves is just as important as the way it looks. From its foundation, both the visuals and motion of liquid glass were designed as one. The motion of liquids is something we all have an intuitive feel for. Their smooth, responsive, and effortless motion and behavior are properties that interfaces can reference to move and react in a way that aligns with our innate grasp of the physical world. To this effect, liquid glass responds to interaction by instantly flexing and energizing with light. This makes the interface feel responsive, satisfying, and alive. And it has an inherent gel-like flexibility to it that communicates its transient and malleable nature as it moves in tandem with your interaction. This fluidity helps the interface feel aligned with the dynamism and continually changing nature of our thinking and movement. Elements can even lift up into liquid glass temporarily, such as when you interact with a component. This lets the resting state stay visually quiet while it comes to life on touch. This works great for things like controls, where the transparent liquid lens can be seen through to precisely observe the value underneath it. This sense of fluidity also extends not just to how the material reacts to your input, but also how it reacts to the dynamically changing environments of modern apps. As you go between states in an app, liquid glass dynamically morphs between the controls in each context. This maintains the concept of having a singular floating plane that the controls live on. And it makes transitions between different sections of an app feel fluid and seamless as the controls continually shapeshift. When showing a menu, the bubble simply pops open to reveal the content within. This lightweight, inline transition keeps everything right where you just tapped, and it communicates a very clear and direct relationship between the button and the content contained within. With these properties, Liquid Glass ushers in a new era of how apps look, but it also changes how they feel too. With the ability to bend and shape light in new ways, fused with the ability to dynamically flex and shapeshift, Liquid Glass is designed to make the experience of apps feel fundamentally more organic, more immersive, and more fluid. Next, to dive into how Liquid Glass adapts automatically across different contexts and platforms, I'd like to hand it over to Shabam.
Thanks, Chan. Liquid Glass is designed from the ground up to be adaptive to both its size and its environment. Its primary goal is to remain visually clear, deferring to the content underneath. But it's also constantly, subtly changing to ensure legibility and to maintain clear separation from the content layer. Liquid Glass is composed of a number of layers that work together to give it its unique look. And unlike previous materials that had a fixed light or dark appearance, each layer continuously adapts based on what's behind it. As text scrolls underneath, shadows become more prominent to create additional separation. The amount of tint and dynamic range shift to always ensure buttons remain legible while letting as much of the content through as possible. And when needed, it can also independently switch between light and dark, allowing it to feel perfectly at home in any context, really letting your app's content shine. When glass flexes and morphs to larger sizes, like when presenting a menu from a toolbar button, its material characteristics change to simulate a thicker, more substantial material. It casts deeper, richer shadows, has more pronounced lensing and refraction effects, and a softer scattering of light. These subtle changes enhance the perceived depth and aid in the legibility of the content within the glass element itself. Liquid Glass is fundamental to creating a unified design language across all of our platforms. On iPad and Mac, we've applied these very same principles. Just like on iPhone, these Liquid Glass layers form a distinct functional layer for controls and navigation, floating above everything and giving you a larger, more expansive canvas for your content. Glass controls nest perfectly into the rounded corners of windows, maintaining concentricity throughout the UI. On larger elements like sidebars, the appearance of Liquid Glass is informed by the ambient environment within the app. Light from colorful content nearby can subtly spill onto its surface, reinforcing the material's context and its sense of elevation within the interface. And the effect isn't limited to the surface. The light reflects, scatters, and bleeds into the shadow as well, much like it would in the physical world. Floating sidebars on iPad and Mac enable a whole new level of immersion. The sidebar and tab bar together form a cohesive and consistent language for the core navigation of apps across all platforms. It can now be thought of as a single navigational element that fluidly scales as the canvas of the app grows. Next, let's talk about scroll edge effects. Scroll edge effects work in concert with Liquid Glass to maintain that crucial separation between the UI and content layers and ensure legibility, especially with dynamically scrolling content. Just like Liquid Glass, scroll edge effects are inherently adaptive. As content begins to scroll underneath a glass element, the effect gently dissolves the content into the background, lifting the glass visually above the moving content and allowing floating elements like titles to always remain clear. When darker content scrolls under, triggering the glass itself to transition to its dark style, the effect intelligently switches to apply a subtle dimming instead, again, ensuring contrast and legibility. In some cases, like when there are pinned accessory views under a toolbar, such as column headers for example, we use a hard style effect instead. Instead of a gradual fade, the effect is applied uniformly across the height of the toolbar and the pinned accessory view. You'll want to use this style when you need that extra degree of visual separation between floating elements in the accessory view and the scrolling content below. So that's a look at how Liquid Glass adapts across sizes, environments, and platforms, and how you can leverage it alongside scroll edge effects to ensure clarity and legibility, all while letting your app's content truly take center stage. Next, I'd like to hand it off to Bruno to discuss Liquid Glass variants in more depth and guidelines on how best to use them in your apps.
Thanks, Shabam. To get the most out of Liquid Glass, it is important to understand it at a deeper level. Let's go over how it's built and some of its behaviors. That way, you'll know what to expect when you start designing with it. The true magic of Liquid Glass lies in its holistic design. The light play, the depth effects, the adaptive changes, they aren't isolated features. They are layers inside a sophisticated system working together to create a material that is greater than the sum of its parts. Let's look at some of these layers more closely. First, the highlights layer. Liquid glass lives inside an environment that behaves like the world around us. Light sources inside of this environment shine on the material, producing highlights that respond to geometry just as you'd expect. On interactions, such as locking and unlocking your phone, these lights move in space, causing light to travel around the material, defining its silhouette. And in some cases, the lighting responds to device motion, making it feel like Liquid Glass is aware of its position in the real world. Shadows also play an important role in helping elements feel grounded and defined. Pay close attention to the shadow in the next slide. The element is aware of what's behind it and increases the opacity of its shadow when it is over text. Conversely, it lowers the opacity of its shadow when it is over a solid light background. This provides separation from the content to make sure elements are always easy to spot. When you interact with Liquid Glass, the material illuminates from within as a form of feedback. Starting right under your fingertips, the glow spreads throughout the element and onto any Liquid Glass elements nearby, interacting with the flexible properties of the material in a way that feels natural and fluid. These behaviors make the interface feel alive and directly connected to the physical world and device input. There are times where multiple layers adapt together to maintain clarity and focus within the UI hierarchy. For example, when a window loses focus on the Mac or iPad, Liquid Glass shifts its appearance and visually recedes to guide attention. And this sophistication comes built in. You get all these nuanced dynamic behaviors automatically when applying Liquid Glass to your designs. All right, now that I've gone over its structure and behaviors, I'll talk about how and when to use Liquid Glass, as well as the different variants you can choose from. You may be tempted to use Liquid Glass everywhere, but it is best reserved for the navigation layer that floats above the content of your app. Consider this table view. Making it Liquid Glass would make it compete with other elements and muddy the hierarchy, so keep it in the content layer instead to ensure clarity. Similarly, always avoid glass on glass. Stacking Liquid Glass elements on top of each other can quickly make the interface feel cluttered and confusing. When placing elements on top of Liquid Glass, avoid applying the material to both layers. Instead, use fills, transparency, and vibrancy for the top elements to make them feel like a thin overlay that is part of the material. Next, let's talk about Liquid Glass variants. There are two to choose from: regular and clear. They should never be mixed, as they each have their own characteristics and specific use cases. Regular is the most versatile and the one you will be using the most. This variant gives you all the visual and adaptive effects we've talked about and provides legibility regardless of context. It works in any size, over any content, and anything can be placed on top of it. Clear, on the other hand, does not have adaptive behaviors. It is permanently more transparent, which allows the richness of the content underneath to come through and interact with the glass in beautiful ways. To provide enough legibility for symbols or labels, it needs a dimming layer to darken the underlying content. Without it, legibility gets noticeably worse. If Liquid Glass elements in your app have a smaller footprint, you can use localized dimming and allow the content to retain more of its original vibrancy. To recap, whereas the regular variant can work anywhere, clear should only be used when these three conditions are met. First, the element you're applying it to is over media-rich content. Second, your content layer won't be negatively affected by introducing a dimming layer. And lastly, The content sitting above it is bold and bright. Now I'll talk about legibility, a central consideration that went into the design of liquid glass. Small elements like nav bars and tab bars constantly adapt their appearance depending on what's behind them. They also flip from light to dark based on the background to make sure the material looks as good as possible and is easily discernible. Bigger elements, like menus or sidebars, also adapt based on context, but they don't flip from light to dark. Their surface area is too big, and transitions like these would be distracting. To maintain legibility, symbols and glyphs on top of liquid glass do the same. They flip from light to dark and vice versa, mirroring the glass's behavior to maximize contrast. All content placed on the regular variant will automatically receive this treatment. You can also use custom colors, but use them selectively. When items or elements serve a distinct functional purpose, you can tint them to bring attention to them. Let's take a closer look at how this works. Liquid glass introduces a new way of tinting elements that respects the principles of the material and maximizes legibility. This technique is consistent across all liquid glass elements, from labels, text, and fully tinted buttons to the time on your lock screen. It brings life and vibrancy to the material and connects it more deeply to the content around it. Selecting a color generates a range of tones that are mapped to content brightness underneath the tinted element. It draws inspiration from how colored glass works in reality, changing its hue, brightness, and saturation depending on what's behind without deviating too much from the intended color. Not only does this emphasize the physicality of the material, but it also helps legibility and contrast. What's great is that tinting is natively compatible with all the behaviors of glass, so you can tint any element very easily. Here's a button that is using a solid fill instead of the built-in tinting. As you can tell, it is completely opaque and breaks the visual character of liquid glass. But notice when it starts using the new tinting. All of a sudden, it feels more transparent and more grounded in its environment. Tinting should only be used to bring emphasis to primary elements and actions in the UI. First, let's look at an example of what not to do. Avoid tinting all your elements. When every element is tinted, nothing stands out, and it can be confusing. If you want to imbue color into your app, do it in the content layer instead. On the other hand, this View Back button is a great example of when to use tinting. The red makes it stand out as the primary action in this food delivery app. The content layer is also key to avoiding any unwanted visual noise. In steady states, such as when an app first launches, avoid intersections between content and liquid glass. Instead, reposition or scale the content to maintain separation. In addition to these legibility considerations, there are also several accessibility features that liquid glass offers to suit all kinds of people and needs. These act as modifiers on the material that change certain layers of liquid glass without sacrificing its magic. For instance, reduced transparency makes liquid glass frostier and obscures more of the content behind it. Increased contrast makes elements predominantly black or white and highlights them with a contrasting border. And reduced motion decreases the intensity of some effects and disables any elastic properties for the material. These are available automatically whenever you use the new material. So whenever these settings are turned on at a system level, liquid glass elements will get them across the board. Throughout this session, we covered the core principles and values for liquid glass. We explored its functionality, behavior, and discussed practical guidelines to use it effectively and inclusively. Liquid glass delivers a unified design language across all platforms, seamlessly blending hardware and software. It introduces a more fluid and dynamic interaction experience than ever before, bringing a striking new look to every part of the interface. This is the start of a new chapter in Apple's visual and interaction design, and we can't wait for you to be a part of it.